So we're going to learn about complex numbers in this course. These are the set of modules. So each of these sections will talk about these individual subtopics. So we're going to start, we're learning about I. In our next module, we'll learn about how to add and subtract complex numbers, then multiplying and conjugating them, finding the absolute value of them, and then how to divide them. But today we start with introduction of I. Before I get there, let's talk about your prerequisites. Let's talk about what you need to know, what is expected of you. We expect that you be able to handle square root and squaring of numbers. So if I have 36 and I want to find the square root of that, I know that this is going to be plus or minus 6. Now, what does that tell me? It tells me if I take 6 and square it, I'm going to get back 36. If I take negative 6 and square it, I'm going to get back 36. That's what this means. What else do I expect you to know about square root? Well, if I have 36 and I square it, it's the same thing as saying the square root of 9 multiplied by 4. Because 9 times 4 is 36. Now, once I have this like this, I can separate them. I can say the square root of 9 multiplied by the square root of 4. Now, the square root of 9 is plus or minus 3. And the square root of 4 is plus or minus 2. And so you will see that I still end up with plus or minus 6. Okay? You're going to need to recall this as we move forward. What else do I need you to recall? I need you to recall dealing with polynomials, multiplying them and their identities. So let's jump right into an identity. Okay? Let's say I had a plus 3, and I want to multiply this by a minus 3. So what you have to recall in multiplying polynomials is that we want to take everything in the first bracket and multiply everything in the second bracket. And so to be careful, what we do is we want to say the first times the first, and then the first times the second, and then the second times the first, and then the second times the second. That's one way to make sure that we get it right, okay? So that's how we multiply. But now we're looking at this situation here, and what you're supposed to recognize here is that this is an identity. What we have here is a plus b multiplied by a minus b, okay? And what we're supposed to get here is a squared minus b squared. This is our identity. Let's work it out the long way and see if in fact we get that. A times a is a squared. A times minus 3 is minus 3a. 3 times a is plus 3a. And 3 times a minus 3 is minus 9. But you will realize that right here, they're like terms. So I have minus 3a and plus 3a, so I can add them because they are both a's. And when I do that, I'm going to get 0a, which is 0. So these cancel themselves out. And what I'm left with is a squared minus 9. Now, if you look very closely at this, this is actually a squared minus 3 squared, which is in fact this identity, right? A squared minus b squared, right? Again, this is going to come in handy as we move forward. These are things you're supposed to recall. Feel free to ask questions. Maybe I could find a video for you. Maybe I could make a video for you. Maybe we could set up a session and go over these. These are the things you need to know. Let's talk about I. If I have the square root of -1, The only way we can find this is to call this I. And of course, you know, I is for imaginary. Why is it the only way? Because the square root of a negative number is something that we don't have. We just don't have that in a set of real numbers. We don't. A negative times a negative gives me a positive times a positive gives me a positive. So I will never get back a negative if I square the answer, except in the imaginary numbers. Well, how are we going to work with this? What if I had the square root of 64? I would get plus or minus 8. So 8 squared gives me 64. Negative 8 squared gives me 64. Any of these that I square will give me a positive number. What if I had a negative 64? And I wanted to find the square root of that. Well, this is where we have to be careful. What we have here is we have the square root of 64 times negative 1. And as we showed you earlier, what this is the square root of 64 times the square root of negative 1. Hence, this is 8i. 8i. Because the square root of 64, let's take 8. The square root of negative 1 is going to be I. We'll come back to that in a minute. So let's get back to I. Okay. So if the square root of negative 1 is equal to I, it then tells us that I squared is equal to negative 1. Of course it does, because if I have 16 and I square that and I get 4, then that tells me that 4 squared gives me 16. Interesting, right? So let's use that information to figure out some more things. So what is the value of I3? I to the third power. Well, notice what we said just now. We said I squared is equal to negative 1. I to the third power is equal to I squared multiplied by I, correct? That's I to the third power. Now, I squared is negative 1, so this is negative 1 multiplied by I, hence this is negative I. So it's I to the fourth power. Well, I to the fourth power is equal to I squared multiplied by I squared. And we already know that I squared is negative 1. So this is negative 1 multiplied by negative 1, which then becomes a positive 1. So take a look at what we've discovered so far. We've discovered I squared is negative 1 and IQ is equal to negative I. I to the fourth power is equal to positive 1. What do you think I to the fifth power will be? All right, so right here is a good point for you to pause this video and give it a try. Unpause it and you will find the solution there. So let's go ahead and solve it. So I to the fifth power is actually equal to I to the fourth power multiplied by I. I to the fourth power is just 1. So this is 1 times I, which is just I. So I to the fifth power is I. And so you can figure out any of these as we move forward. Okay? So what's all of this about? Well, Z, which is your complex number, is given like this. Z is equal to A plus bi, where a is real and bi is imaginary. So an example of a complex number is equal to 4 plus 5i. Another example, 2 minus 3i. This is the format in which we speak about complex numbers, and this is what it means. It's a combination of a real and an imaginary part. This is one number. This isn't two numbers. This is one number, and it's called a complex number. A complex number. Okay? A complex number. All right? And that's where this first session ends. In your next session, you're going to learn how to manipulate these numbers, learn to add them, and learn to subtract them.